It's a Tuesday morning. You're refilling your water bottle in the break room when Claire walks in. She's holding a coffee mug with a chipped handle. She smiles at you. You smile back. It's nothing. That's what you tell yourself. You go back to your desk, you answer emails, you forget about it. Except you don't. At 11 p.m. that night, lying in bed, you're still thinking about the way she said good morning like she meant it. You don't have her. You're not dating her. You don't even know if she wants you. But somehow, without deciding to, you've started imagining the kind of husband you'd be if she ever became your wife. You open your banking app, you look at the number $340 in checking, $1,200 in credit card debt. No savings account worth mentioning. You're not worried about affording a date with her. You're worried about whether you could ever become the kind of man she'd choose to spend her life with. You close the app. You don't sleep well. Claire works two desks over. She's been at the company 8 months longer than you. She notices things most people miss: the new guy who always holds the elevator, the intern who looks overwhelmed, the man who quietly restocks the coffee filters nobody thanks him for. She starts noticing you, not because you try to impress her. You don't. You just keep being who you are. The guy who stays 15 minutes late to help a coworker fix a spreadsheet. The guy who remembers people's coffee orders. The guy who's kind when nobody's watching. She starts finding reasons to walk past your desk. She asks about your weekend. She remembers your answer the following week and brings it up again. Small things. Things that shouldn't mean anything. They mean everything to you. Weeks pass. The conversations get longer. She starts texting first, sometimes just to send a meme, sometimes to ask what you're doing that weekend. You reply too fast and then worry you replied too fast. One Friday, she asks if you want to grab food after work. Nothing formal, just tacos from the place 2 blocks from the office. You sit outside on plastic chairs for 2 hours, long after the food is gone, talking about her college roommate, a show you're both behind on, the terrible playlist the office speakers cycle through. Walking to your car afterward, she says, "This was nice. We should do it again." You drive home with the windows down, even though it's cold, because you need the air. Somewhere in this, small things start happening to you that you don't fully understand yet. You hear a song on the radio and think, she'd like this. You see a mug in a store window shaped like a fox and think, Claire would buy that just because it's ugly in a good way. Something funny happens at work, and your first instinct isn't to laugh. It's to find her and tell her, because it isn't fully funny until she knows about it. You start imagining things that have nothing to do with romance and everything to do with a life. Not just what it would be like to kiss her, what it would be like to come home on a bad Tuesday and find her in the kitchen, half paying attention to something on the stove. What it would be like to be the person she calls first if her father got sick. What it would be like to argue about something small, where to spend a holiday, whether to fix the car or replace it, and still be on the same side by the end of it. You don't tell anyone this. You barely admit it to yourself. Here's the part that matters most. Claire has never said any of this to you. She's never mentioned a salary number. She's never talked about the size of a house or the year of a car. She's never once implied that money is how she measures a man. Once, at a work happy hour, someone jokes about marrying rich. Claire just shrugs and says she'd rather marry someone who shows up. The table laughs and moves on. You don't. You carry that sentence home with you and turn it over for days, trying to figure out exactly what it means, exactly what showing up would require of you. You start asking yourself questions you never used to ask. If she ever chose me, would I be ready? Could I handle an emergency without panicking? Could I support a family? Could we ever buy a house? Then, some nights, you catch yourself and think it through more carefully. Maybe Claire wouldn't care if I had $10,000 saved or $100,000. Maybe she would. Maybe the number was never really the point. Maybe what she'd want is someone who doesn't run from responsibility, whatever that number turns out to be. But how could you know? She's never told you. You're not solving her expectations. You're solving your own idea of them, built from a handful of comments and the particular way she talks about her parents' 31-year marriage, like it's the only thing in the world worth building. You don't know what she wants. You've just started measuring yourself against a woman who has no idea she's being measured. That fall, a friend from college buys a house. Another coworker gets engaged and starts talking about a venue that costs more than you make in 4 months. A guy on your team leases a car that's nicer than anything you've ever driven and mentions his investment portfolio the way other people mention the weather. None of it makes you bitter. It just makes you quiet for a second, doing math you didn't ask to do. I'm making progress, but I'm still behind. Not behind them exactly, behind the version of your life you'd need to have ready if Claire ever looked at you and said yes. You open a spreadsheet on a Sunday afternoon and write down every expense from the last 3 months. The number embarrasses you. $187 on food delivery in 1 month. A gym membership you haven't used since March. A credit card sitting at 24% interest, growing every month you ignore it. You make a decision. Not a resolution, a decision. If you ever lived with Claire, if you ever built a life in the same rooms as her, you didn't want to bring an invisible weight into it. You didn't want the first years of something real to be spent paying for something old. You start paying off the card. $340 extra, one paycheck. $310 the next. It takes 4 months. The day the balance hits zero, you don't celebrate. You just sit with the number for a second and feel something settle in your chest that wasn't there before. You don't tell Claire any of this. She doesn't know the card existed. She doesn't know it's gone. You think more than once about telling her, not for credit, just to have said it out loud. But it doesn't feel like something you're doing for a conversation. It feels like something you're doing because you can't stand the gap anymore between the man you want to be and the man your bank statement says you are. You start an emergency fund next. $50 a paycheck, automatic, untouched. Slow. Some months only $25 because the car needs an oil change or a friend's wedding costs more than you planned. It grows anyway. $600, $1,100, $2,000. Your company starts a 401k match, 50 cents on every dollar up to 6%. You'd ignored it for a year. Now you sign up for the full amount, and it feels almost embarrassing that you waited this long to take free money that was sitting right there. You open a Roth IRA too, $150 a month automatic into a simple diversified fund. For the first time, you're not just thinking about next month's bills. You're thinking about a version of your life 30 years out, one where the version of you that's old isn't scared the way the version of you right now sometimes is. None of this happens in a straight line. In month 7, your car's transmission fails. $1,400 you don't want to spend. You use the emergency fund, the whole thing, and watch it drop back to zero. For a week, you feel like you're starting over. Then you understand something you didn't understand before. Being financially responsible was never about making sure nothing bad happens. It's about making sure one bad thing doesn't turn into 5. The car breaking down didn't wreck you. 6 months ago, it would have. You rebuild the fund. Slower this time, but you rebuild it. Meanwhile, Claire keeps getting closer, and you start noticing things about her that don't fit the picture you've been building in your head. She's not as put together as you assumed. She's 3 years behind on her own retirement savings and jokes about it in a way that doesn't quite land as a joke. She stresses about a promotion she isn't sure she wants. She calls her mom crying once in the stairwell, thinking no one can hear her, and you happen to be the one who does. You realize you'd been comparing yourself to a version of Claire that didn't exist, a woman with her whole life solved, waiting for a man to catch up to her. The real Claire is figuring it out too, at the same time you are, in her own apartment with her own doubts. That should make things easier. It doesn't, not entirely, but it makes them more honest. She starts telling you things she doesn't tell other people. That her dad worked 2 jobs when she was a kid. That her parents never had much money, but always seemed to have enough. That she wants a life someday that feels stable more than impressive. She's not asking you for anything. She's just talking. but you listen to every word like it's a blueprint. Another time, she mentions a neighborhood near downtown, one with a park and old brick buildings, and says offhand that she'd love to live there eventually. You know exactly what those units go for. You know exactly how far you are from affording one. You say nothing. You just file it away with everything else. Is that the life she expects? Would she be happy with me? Would I be the person she pictured? The pressure isn't coming from her. It's coming from how much you want to be enough for her, and from the widening, uncomfortable space between doing better and being ready. Your desire for her starts to feel almost painful, not because anything is wrong, because everything feels closer to right, and that makes losing it feel closer too. When she was just a girl you liked, rejection would have stung and passed. Now that she's your friend, losing her would take something out of you. And if you ever told her the truth, you could lose both things at once: the friendship you already have and the something more you're not sure you'll ever get. There's a night, a few months in, when you almost tell her everything. You're sitting on a bench outside a coffee shop, and she asks, half joking, why you've been so quiet lately. The words are right there. I think I'm in love with you. I've been trying to fix my life so I'd be ready if you ever wanted me. I'm scared I'm behind. You stop yourself, not because you're ashamed of her, because you don't want to hand her the weight of your own insecurity and ask her to carry it. That isn't fair to put on someone who's never once asked you to prove anything. You say something else instead, something smaller. The moment passes. You keep noticing things you don't say out loud either. The way she goes quiet for a second when you mention a woman from another department, then changes the subject too fast. The way she asks, almost carefully, if you're seeing anyone, and looks relieved when you say no. The way she's the one who texts first when something good happens to you, before your own friends even hear about it. The way she remembers 8 months later the exact story you told her about your grandfather's watch. You don't let yourself read too much into it. You've been wrong about her before, in your own head, in 100 small ways. Somewhere in month 10, you make a mistake. A coworker won't stop talking about a stock that can't miss. You put in $800, money that should have gone to your Roth, and watch it lose almost half its value in 6 weeks. You sell at a loss because you can't stand watching it anymore. It doesn't undo the progress, but it teaches you something the spreadsheet never could: that discipline is worth more than a hot tip, and that the boring, automatic contribution into a diversified fund has quietly outperformed your one clever idea by a wide margin. You go back to boring. Boring keeps working. 2 months later, your landlord raises the rent $175. You're grateful, for once, that the fund exists. Not for a true emergency, just for the room to breathe while you decide whether to stay or move. You stay. You find $175 by cutting a subscription and cooking 4 more meals a week than you used to. Around this time, you also start asking yourself a harder question. Are you doing all of this because you genuinely want to become someone more responsible? Or are you secretly trying to become the man you think Claire would choose? You sit with that for a while and realize both things are probably true. You wanted to change before you met her. You just never had a reason urgent enough to start. Claire didn't create the desire. She gave it a face. Before her, you could postpone your future indefinitely. After her, the future had a name and a laugh and a way of tilting her head when she's really listening. A stretch project opens up at work, the kind nobody wants because it's extra hours for the same pay. You take it anyway. 6 months later, it turns into a promotion, $6,200 more a year. You understand, finally, that fixing what goes out only gets you so far. At some point, you have to grow what comes in. There's a moment, right after the raise clears, when you almost don't put it towards savings. A friend is pushing you to lease a newer car, something that looks like you're doing well. You sit in the dealership parking lot for 10 minutes with the paperwork on the passenger seat, engine running, before you drive away without signing anything. It isn't about the car. It's about who you'd be spending the money to look like versus who you're actually trying to become. You increase your 401k contribution by 2% instead and let the rest flow into savings. A year and a half after that Tuesday morning in the break room, your numbers look different. $8,400 in emergency savings, no credit card debt, a retirement account that's finally started to feel real instead of theoretical, a raise you earned instead of hoped for. You're not rich, you know that. You're still not in that downtown neighborhood with the park and the old brick buildings. You're still, by some measure, behind. But you're not fragile anymore. And somewhere along the way, that started to matter more than being ahead. Claire's presence in your life stopped being a possibility and started being a fact. She's the person you call when something good happens before you call anyone else. Neither of you has said the word yet. Both of you have started living like it's already true. Then, on an ordinary Thursday, you're sitting on that same bench outside the coffee shop, and Claire is quiet for a second, looking at her cup instead of you. "I've been wondering when you were finally going to tell me," she says. You don't understand at first. Then you do. "I thought you knew," she says. "I've liked you for a long time. I just didn't want to be the one who said it first and got it wrong." You think about every small thing you missed or almost let yourself see and talked yourself out of. The quiet in the stairwell, the question about whether you were seeing anyone, the way she remembered your grandfather's watch 8 months later. It was there the whole time. You just couldn't stop measuring yourself long enough to notice it. You sit there, and for the first time in a year and a half, you're not doing math in your head. Later, walking home, you understand something you couldn't have explained a year ago. She never loved a spreadsheet. She never fell for a savings account or a payoff plan or the 2% you moved into your 401k. She fell for the version of you that kept showing up, long before any of the numbers changed. Patient, steady, present, even when he was scared he wasn't enough. You spent 18 months trying to become a man you imagined she wanted, built out of guesses and half-remembered comments and your own fear of falling short. But she was never waiting for that man. She was already falling for the one who existed the whole time, the one who stayed late for a coworker's spreadsheet, who remembered her coffee order, who was kind when nobody was watching, long before he had $8,400 saved or a credit card at zero. The money didn't earn her love. It changed something quieter than that. It changed how you stood next to her, not as someone hoping to be enough, but as someone who finally believed he already was, and kept building anyway. Months later, you're on the same bench. Claire's head is on your shoulder, and she's talking about apartments you can't quite afford yet, and someday probably can, and neither of you seems worried about which one it turns out to be. The old you would have reached for his phone right then, checked the balance, done the math. This time, you don't. You just sit there, behind on some things, ahead on others, further along than you were and still not finished. And for once, that feels like enough. Not because you finally caught up, because you finally stopped needing to.